次是光天化日之下偷天换日，把美国司法部所有的 trustee 和共产党的勾兑，这个 PAG 在美国人面前表演了一次共产党多牛 ，PAG 多牛。我能让司法部委任的 trustee， 我找个理由把他干掉，换成我的马仔。PAS 厉害吧？能让你郭文贵从纽约南区法官这儿不经过判决，不经陪审团简易判决，让你2亿多美金，然后七哥申请破产，我不让你破产，啊好，我说我不破产是吧？啊，然后家人支持我破产，哎呀不让你破产，好，我同意不破产，不破产也不行。最后申请 trustee， 人家指定了一个，就是美国司法部指定了一个完全德高望重的一个人，共和党人，不行。最后 PAS 以这个人有 conflict 利益冲突，是什么原来的一个律师事务所，一个曾经到他所干过，你说这王八蛋逻辑啊！结果指定了一个叫 Paul Hansen 是在中共国代理什么阿里巴巴、币安、什么潘石屹，而且是 PAG 房地产 PAG 这个并购的法律律师，这不是利益冲突了，他就是一伙的，他是亲爹和儿子的关系啊，上千个律师啊，指定为七哥的所谓的 trustee。啥叫 trustee 知道吗？就没有七哥了，就七哥的内裤、袜子什么东西，他有权给拿走，就这么厉害。
Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of the CCP Reality Checks special series. This is the episode 3 of this special series, which talks about how the CCP infiltrates the U.S. judicial system. I am David Starwatcher, your host from Himalaya, Washington, D.C. farm. I am also a proud member of the new federal state of China.
Hello, everyone. I'm your co-host, Nancy, from New Federal State of China, also coming from Washington, D.C. farm. Glad to join David tonight.
Thank you, Nancy. And tonight, Nancy and I are going to bring to our audience just to looking into one of the cases, which is related to the unrestricted lawfare waived by the CCP regime against Mr. Mao's score. So, without further ado, we now start looking into these cases. So before that, we are going to look into the disclaimer. So this video is for educational and informative purposes only. We are dedicated to share with you what is really happening in China and to try our best to verify information used. Jointly, we fight back CCP propaganda. We highly value your independent research, critical thinking, and comments. So this is from the CCP Reality Check team. So we are going through the next slide. So as for today, we are still looking into how the CCP infiltrates the US judicial system. So we move on to the next slide. So we are going to look into 2 aspects. One, we are going to look into the updates of the case number 22-50073. Which is Mr. Mao's score's bankruptcy case. We are going to look into the updates of this case and review some of the background information. The second part we're looking into tonight is the case of George Higginbotham with case number 18-343CKK. So we move on to the next one. For the episode 01, so we got a case number 225073's update. We are looking into the conflicts of interest and the CCP scam, the Luc A. Depon's appointment that continues. The update here, before we continue, I would like to bring to people saying that in the last 2 episodes, we have provided the background of DOJ's trustee's office On July the 5th, just a quick recap. On July the 5th, the DOJ Office of U.S. Trustees withdraw the Joe Whitley for a no reason. And then on July the 7th, the DOJ's Office of United States Trustee appointed Luc R. Dupont, who has significant conflict of interests. So now the case is Luc R. Dupont filed a motion against cancellation of his position as the Chapter 11 trustee of the debtor, from his score here, and Luc R. Dupont instead motioned for hiring a new law firm, NPM, to deal with the conflict of interest on July 19th, 2022. So we now saw here saying that this is basically, we see it in this particular slide here. This is Luc R. Dupont requesting the court to retain the nomination of himself as the Chapter 11 trustee of the debtor, of whom we know is Mr. Miles Score. And pay attention to the second red line in the lowest corner of the picture. Luc R. Dupont also made a request to retain Paul Hastings as Luc R. Dupont's lead counsel. And this is made on July the 12th, 2022 by Luc R. Dupont. So we are continue to the next one, because there are additional things coming up. In this slide, he made additional request by calling to the court to let the NPM to act as a local conflict counsel, which the Paul Hastings, which is saying to provide services of which the Paul Hastings may not be able to provide as a result of or perceived conflict of interest. That is, if you're looking carefully, that is in the first red line. And this is made by Luc R. Dupont. The reason why Luc R. Dupont wanted to retain himself as the Chapter 11 trustee to the debtor. Nancy, you smell something fishy in the anticipated services?
Yeah.
Nancy?
Yeah, it's right. If Luc is confident, as he stated, his earlier affidavit signed, there's no confidence of Hastings. Why is he hiring NPM perform to fill in the conflict of interest if there's anyone in these additional addendum? Right?
That is a very, very good point, Nancy. I have to say that's a very good point. Yes, I mean, this is very strange. If you have missed Nancy's point, I mean, so Nancy some very good point of saying by the question of why will Luc R. Dupont asking NPM to act as a local conflict counsel if he has that much of confidence to say that Paul Hastings is disinterested? That's a very good question, Nancy. Very good question. So let's move on to the next other things that comes up. In addition, that Luc R. Dupont stated that NPM, be careful if our dear viewers looking into that red underlined part, look into it. It says the NPM will coordinate with Paul Hastings regarding their respective responsibilities. Keyword here is coordination with the Paul Hastings. That makes no difference, right, Nancy? That doesn't make any difference.
Right. And then specifically, they will have to coordinate with Paul Hastings, and then how NPM will handle the conflict of interest if they have to work with Paul Hastings in this kind of business model. It read to me, it's more like NPM is a subcontractor of Paul Hastings, and then how could they avoid the conflict of interest, which is the purpose to bring in an MP, right? Yeah. Very
That's
interesting
true.
ask. Yeah, we will see how DOJ trustee office and the judge will respond to him on this request.
Well, we'll see. There's something more coming up. Next slide, please. Okay, so you now see here, it's titled as NPM is disinterested. How he's going to do this. Let's see the underlined part. It said that to the best of the Chapter 11 trustees' knowledge in reliance upon the Lindsay Declaration, and jump to the second part. Second underlined part. It says, based on Lindsay Declaration, the Chapter 11 trustee believes that NPM does not represent any adverse interest to unsecured creditors in connection with these cases. So the problem is, Nancy, I remember that NPM is being reviewed as a very small law firm with only 36 lawyers in comparison to a Leviathan like the Paul Hastings, which is very big. So how could NPM guarantee not being influenced by PH if they have to coordinate with the PH, right?
Yeah, and plans that provided by look at the palm, mentioning how that influence will be avoided, right? Yeah,
that's true. And actually, that's a very weird question to ask, by the way. Yeah. So that's true. I mean, so that is the update of entire case. For now, from the next, just move to the next slide. We are going to recap some of the backgrounds between the Paul Hastings and the PAG and even to the CCP. So now this, we already see here, Paul Hastings is related to the PAG. As we have seen, the title said, Paul Hastings led PAG, which is the Pacific Alliance Group, if you want that. It makes $671 million bid for Spring REIT, and this is a merger and acquisition case. Let's move on to the next one. This is also a recap to remind all of us, including me and our viewers, that Paul Hastings is the Hong Kong legal service provider for the Jinshan Bank, as we have reviewed in an earlier episode of a special series. Move on. There's even more to recap. So now we just quickly recap that Bruno Zhong-Wu, a registered FARA agent by the number of 6611. We also covered that in the early episode. He is actually having the relationship to the Harvest Fund Management, and the Harvest Fund Management is one of the major stockholders of the Jinshan Bank. And the last one is Paul Hastings is therefore related to Jinshan Bank, and directly we see the entire slide related to the Harvest Fund. So, Director, we were going to play a video that talks about Higginbotham's involvement.
2018. George Higginbotham, a former employee with the U.S. Department of Justice, pleaded guilty today for his role in a conspiracy to deceive banks in the United States about the source and purpose of millions of dollars sent from overseas to finance a lobbying campaign on behalf of foreign interests. According to admissions made in connection with his plea, in 2017, Higginbotham helped facilitate the transfer of tens of millions of dollars from foreign bank accounts to accounts in the United States to finance a lobbying campaign to resolve civil and criminal matters related to the Department of Justice's investigation of the embezzlement and bribery scheme concerning One Malaysia Development Bearhead. Higginbotham admitted that the foreign principal behind the lobbying campaign was alleged to be the primary architect of the 1MDB scheme. Higginbotham, as a Justice Department employee, played no role in any aspect of the investigation and failed to influence any aspect of the department's investigation of 1MDB. Higginbotham further admitted that another purpose of the lobbying campaign was an attempt to persuade high-level U.S. government officials to have a separate foreign national, who was residing in the United States on a temporary visa at the time, removed from the United States and sent back to his country of origin. 2018. George Higginbotham, a former employee with the U.S. Department of Justice.
Okay, so now we are going to looking into the case. The second part of today's live stream which is the case of Higginbotham, case number 18-343 CKK. So we move on to the next slide, in which we are going to still quick recap. So some of the viewers who have followed our program might have already noticed this entire graph, which revealed the relationship between Bruno Zhongwu and all these people who are involved in CCP's unrestricted warfare against Mr. Miles Guo. So as for today's live stream, we are going to look into George Higginbotham's case, of whom has, of course, you already see it on the left, saying there's Bruno Wu, PAG. I mean, Bruno Wu was behind these a series of lawsuits, which is a part of the CCP's unrestricted lawfare against Mr. Miles Guo. So now we move on to the next slide. This is an overview of the case. Just a quick recap. George Higginbotham, this is a plea agreement from him with a case number itself, of course, is 18-343. So George Higginbotham was served as the DOJ's senior congressional liaison or an oversight counsel for the Department of Justice. Nancy, I heard you have some questions you want to ask for this particular slide.
Yeah, specifically when I look at the role of George Higginbotham, he was pledged guilty. He was served as the DOJ officer, right? And then I was wondering, how could a DOJ member be convinced to make false statement according to the CCP regime?
Well, that's a very good question, Nancy. I thank you for that. So we will look deeper into this case to answer this million-dollar question. Now we move on to the next slide. So this case here, we are now looking into a news that is published on the government website, the Department of Justice Office of Public Affairs. They published that on November the 30th, 2018, which is on Friday. This is the news that said George Higginbotham, the former Justice Department employee, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to deceive the United States banks about So our viewers might have already paid attention to the two of the rectangles here. One is in red, one is in green. They are co-conspirator A and co-conspirator B. So this is very important. So this is something we have to know who they are. The co-conspirator A is someone called Prakash Michael, or if you want to better know about him, he's more known as Pras, spelled P-R-A-S, a very famous, a very big-time rap artist in the United States. And the co-conspirator B, lo and behold, this co-conspirator B is Joe Low. Nancy, you find it a little bit strange here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I was also confused why Joe Low would wanted to get involved, get a rapper, Pras Michael, involved into this case. Rather, while he wouldn't work directly with some business people or some people in other industry. Then I find out more details through internet searching and then the case study. Find out the reason Pras Michael was chosen is because the industry he is working is easier to laundry money.
I have to say I agree, Nancy. I have to say I agree with what you say on this particular fact. As someone who, from my personal experience, I do know something about the entertainment industry usually when someone, I mean, especially if you're working in the bigger labels or the live, saying the modern times entertainment industry, if you're looking into the accountant book, you see a large number of items, and these items are very complicated, and you will find it very hard to find out to find out which money is from which. So this complexity is being exploited, can be very easily exploited. We cannot say that all the entertainment industry is the same, but this level of complexity and the feasibility of setting up a project is being exploited by a lot of money laundering. I mean, the criminals are being exploited by them to use for money laundering. Mm-hmm. So so thank you very much, Nancy. We have to move on to the next one to see a little bit deeper than that. Okay, so wow, someone's actually helping us. Chinese Communist Party regime's ambassador and the Chinese Communist Party's embassy in Washington, D.C. So that's confused right now. Why Pros Michael? We know now Pros Michael is a rapper. He is an entertainer. So why would Pros Michael requesting Higginbotham to meet with the Chinese Communist Party's regime's ambassador in its embassy in the Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I was also, when I read this part, then I resolved my puzzle right earlier, because if we go to Google or the mainstream news, so Joe Low is more publicly associated one MBD case, which is more associated to Malaysia government rather than anyone else. But then by going through this case, you can tell from this part then who is behind this $1 million question, as you mentioned earlier, right? So, yeah.
I started feeling the shredder. I mean, I have to say, I felt a little bit shivering right now. I mean, saying to see that the CCP regime can reach. I mean, at least from what we see here in the case, that says that Pros Michael was requesting at a time, requesting Higginbotham, a DOJ official, to meet with the CCP regime's ambassador in the CCP regime's embassy in Washington, D.C., United States.
Yeah, and it is confirmed in the case, in the lawsuits. Right?
Well, we have to, let's move on to the next slide, because, I mean, this is very, very important, but just keep that point in mind, saying that CCP is involved. Here that Higginbotham was well aware of the purpose of the money was to pay the person one and others to lobby the U.S. government and its officials. So what is all read from this message?
Yeah. Before we, David, we get into your question, and that was puzzled me as well. I wanted to highlight the purpose of the money. Having always public news made known for resolved one MBD matters.
Yeah.
But then it's surprisingly to me to find out the number two purpose, foreign national one removed from the United States and sent back to country Q, which is obviously the CCP regime, basically have Miss Mai's goal removed from the United States and sent back to country Q, right? CCP.
And that is not, or we say that is
it's
rarely
publicly
being covered.
Any can be find any news, but it is in these lawsuit files, right? Yeah. Wanted to highlight to the audience on this specific point. And then get back to your questions. I was also shocked, right? In addition to the complicated case of Michael, Michael, and Jolo and Higginbotham, and then the CCP regime, and then Malaysia government. But we can see that in the U.S. side, the purpose is fund to send money to pay person one and other to lobby the United States government officers, specifically said United government officers and person one. If we went through the file, there it is unrevealed in this whole case. Who is this person one? What the other U.S. government officers that were might have been received part of this money, right? Yeah, it would be interesting to find out.
Well, Nancy, you made a very good point. I mean, I have to say, I'm also very, I'm very interested to know who is this person one and who are the other people, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, there are 2 points about the CCP's involvement. So we will looking into further if this case by looking into the next slide. So case. looking into the second red rectangle, it says Higginbotham believed that the funds would be released in the event the lobbying campaign was successful in having Foreign National 1 removed from the United States. So that means the diversion of funds to Higginbotham's account is directly related to the attempted removal of Mr. Mousecore from the United States.
Yeah, CCP regime is really willing to pay money to get Mr. Mousecore removed from the United States and then to be sent back to U.S.
That's true.
41 million is just the money they paid Mr. George Higginbotham by setting up the account to transfer the money, right?
Right.
It's a transfer, like for setting up the bank account is the guilty that Mr. Higginbotham has claimed. But then, and he was supposed to transfer a lot of money and send to the person one, and then the U.S. officers, government officers. And it was not revealed in this case how much money was transferred through Mr. Higginbotham and then to the person one, and who would be the person one.
That's true. So just let me help summing up for our viewers. So up to now, we saw the CCP's involvement, plus Michael's requesting Higginbotham meet with CCP's ambassador in the CCP's embassy in Washington, D.C., while George Higginbotham was working for the United States Department of Justice. And we also saw that these funds are related to the failed attempt of CCP trying to remove Mr. Mousecore from the United States. So that means that these three things are we were very surprised to see, however, saying that most of the coverage are focused on the 1MDB's relationship, but these part saying the involvement of CCP regime and the failed attempt of removal of Mr. Mousecore from the United States is rarely covered. So with all these points that is now coming into our mind, we are going to look into another slide. So now we're looking into the last slide. So Nancy, as usual, I would like to ask, saying after you've seen a lot of these materials, I mean, I also seen a lot of the case materials opinions that, including the plea agreement from George Higginbotham, which is from the case of George Higginbotham himself. Do you have? I think you might have something you wanted to add on this, or you might have some comments. Nancy?
Yeah. Sorry, I was
It's
on
all
mute. Yeah. As we mentioned during the show, right? In any public website and mainstream mainstream news, it only reveals that George Higginbotham's dealing with the one MBD case with Joe Low, and we are here
That's
to
the case.
reveal details we have not seen in the mainstream, which is CCP's unrestricted lawfare against Mr. Maisel. And then the CCP obviously influenced the U.S. DOJ and its officers to be part of the lawfare against Mr. Maisel, as you can tell, right?
That's from what we saw. Yeah, and you're right, Nancy. That's the best. That's basically we all saw. We all seen from tonight's material that we all shown to you in George Higginbotham's case. So let us just try to recap the points that tonight's episode or tonight's live stream will review the details in a case that is episode of the special series of the CCP reality check. We are going to look into the case of Joe Low, which is of whom is the co-conspirator 2 mentioned here. Stay tuned, and thank you for joining me and Nancy for tonight's CCP reality check special series, episode 3. We'll be seeing you next time. Good night.
Yeah. Good night. Thank you for joining us.